All right. Roger and John are the co-hosts of the Deep Transformation podcast. And between them, they bring a remarkable range of experience. Roger is a professor of psychiatry, philosophy, and anthropology at UC. He's the author of several books, including Essential Spirituality and The World of Shamanism, spanning contemplative practice, well-being, and the psychological roots of our global crisis. John is the CEO of iAwake Technologies, author of Integral Recovery, which is an award-winning book on addiction treatment. He's a passionate advocate for integral transformative practice, host of Journey of Integral Recovery podcast, and a singer-songwriter. So let's welcome Roger and John to the stage, and I'm going to turn it over to Steve to say a few more things and get this conversation started.
Well, thank you, Rigel. And thank you very much, John and Roger, for joining us today. As we were talking about in the green room before we gathered here, I'm really honored to have both of these guys join us because I'm big fans of both their work. Roger, I've been reading your books for 20 years or more. And John, I'm very impressed with your work as well. I've heard both of these gentlemen speak. They're both sages in their own right. And so just learning what they're thinking about or feeling about would be, of course, a edifying topic in its own right. And so I'm interested in anything you want to share. But to get the ball rolling here, let me ask you to talk about your journey over the last, 3 or 4 years with Deep Transformation podcast, which has become very successful. You have like 155,000 YouTube subscribers, and some of the podcasts that you've done have had gigantic audiences. And so I'm interested in your thinking around your original vision for it, how that vision has evolved, where you see it going, and the highlights, and if you care to share any lowlights that are, lessons that may have come from the this beautiful channel that you've created.
John, do you want to lead off?
Yeah, I'll do that. Well, I also had read Roger's books in grad school, and he was always one of the people I wouldn't miss when I went to an Integral conference. I always wanted to be there at his talks. They were always good. And I don't know, a few years ago, I forget which one, we were at the Integral European conference in Hungary, Budapest, and we started talking. And Roger had just lost his wife, Frances Vaughn, and I had just lost my parents, so my beloved parents. And so, we were both kind of open, and we just really connected. And then I think very 20th century thing, I think I gave him a phone call and said, Roger, would you, like to do a podcast? And that started it rolling.
Yeah. And I think what we, as you, Steve, and John, and I, and a lot of people I see here have done a fair bit of writing, and that is a valuable medium and still continues to be, even though a few people read. It used to be I admired people who write. Now I admire people who read. I think there are fewer of them, but it also felt to me increasingly that really it just, in order to reach out as widely as possible and have as most benefit as possible, it really felt it was going to be important to somehow use the new media that were coming available. And so when John extended this invitation, I was delighted, because John has been, a successful businessman with his organization, and had someone who was an excellent manager and a tech person. And so that made it doable. I'd thought of doing a podcast by myself, and I'm so glad I didn't even try, because the amount of work behind the scenes, as in so many cases, is enormous and really requires really good people, which thanks to John, we have. So that makes this project doable. The vision, I would say, has been, the way we began was, okay, well, what would we most like to do? What kind of impact would we most want to have? And what came for both of us, that we really wanted to do something which is not common on the internet. That is, we really wanted to make a depth contribution. There's so much trivia and nonsense and superficiality. It really felt like, what's the deepest contribution we could make, and what's the most strategic contribution we could make? Essentially with the ideal, it was a pretty spiritual ideal of how can this serve the welfare and awakening of as many people as possible. So that was the aspiration. And as part of that, it felt like what we really wanted to do was find those people who had a deep spiritual practice, really had depth to them, and were well informed about either inner transformation or about social and global transformation, and about the great issues of our time, and could speak about those kind of issues from a place of depth and informational span. Now, that's a pretty rare group of people, but we've been pretty fortunate in finding those kind of people. And I think to whatever extent the podcast has been success, and I don't know, there are different ways of measuring success. It's certainly not just span, but I think we've both been very happy that a number of our guests have said, "Oh, this is, I've not had an interview like this before. You guys go really deep." And that gratifies us a lot, because that's what we're hoping for, and that's the kind of contribution we're making. So, or we hope to make. Basically, we figured basically, if we can get really good people who have those characteristics and get their ideas out, that'll be making a contribution, in spite of the fact that, as Ken Wilber pointed out, there's a pyramid of development, and that as you go further up the pyramid, the number of people at it diminishes. Still, it feels like there's a sizable group out there or community who aren't being adequately served by most of the nonsense on the internet. And perhaps we, and particularly our guests, can speak to them and make a strategic contribution. So that's been the kind of vision and aspiration, I would say.
So can you share with us perhaps your favorite of the interviews, the one that you felt went deepest or was most transformational?
Steve McIntosh. Definitely.
I think he's evolved since then. No, clearly you've had some major heavy hitters on your podcast. I'd love to know, just your reflections on that.
We have been very fortunate with people, and I think we've had at least 3 of the people in this community here: Brad Reynolds, you, Steve, and I think I saw someone else. And yes, we've been very fortunate in having people who really do kind of have that profile of real depth and real groundedness in contemporary issues, as well as psychological, spiritual transformation. So we've had a range, and it's been enormous education for us. Who are the favorites? Gosh, it's hard to pick out of that, but I think I have to mention, of course, Hamid Ali, who we've been doing a now year-long series with, and we had the extraordinarily good fortune of
Almas, he's better known.
Yeah, thanks, John. His pen name, who is the founder of the Diamond Approach work, which is really a thriving international organization now. So we've been very fortunate to have him essentially offer to do a download overview of an oral overview of his work and the whole Diamond Approach. And and it's been quite remarkable dialoguing with someone who I think both John and I regard as one of the great sages of history. Truly, I think this, everyone has their favorite teacher or guru or whatever, but I think one has to place him among the greats of both our time and, to my mind, even all time, in that he has forged as Ken Wilber did, not an integration of contemplative practice and contemporary psychology. But unlike Ken, who is more a theoretician, Hamid has been more of a practical contemplative transformer, i.e. coming up with a school and tradition which aims for exactly what we want to speak to, that is deep transformation, and in Hamid's case, the deepest possible transformation. It's been quite amazing to study very deeply his work, and John, which is it gets pretty deep. And John and I'll text each other saying, "I've been reading for 2 hours and I've gotten through 3 pages." That's a good day. So, and I would say, and maybe we can get into this, I think one of the interesting things, which is what kind of transformation has that had on us and the audience. But so Hamid stands out, and there are others. But John, why don't you dive in?
Yeah, well, God, it's like picking your favorite child, you know. Like the guy said, he said, I have 3 beautiful grandchildren and 2 not so much. So anyway, that was a poke at humor. I guess because of who Hamid or H. Almas is, and the depth of his teaching and what comes through him, that has been perhaps the most challenging. And I guess it's pushed me more than other conversations we've had, although other ones have been really good. But this has been this constant. I think we've done like maybe 24 last count. And it's like you get to, I don't know, read Plato. Then every couple of weeks you have a conversation with Plato. You know, it's that kind of thing. So it is a practice for me. It's a spiritual practice to understand the work and lectio divino. That's how I approach it. So it's not like, taking time away from my practice. No, it has become part of my practice. And he's a really sweet man. He's a very good guy. And so I think also Roger and I have become friends, close friends, and that's been great. But there's a friendship now with Hamid, and it feels really good.
Yeah, and I think you pointed to his humility. I think we were kind of awestruck when we first began. It was like we introduced him as this sage. He said, "Sage? I don't see any sage here." So it's been wonderful to have this kind of, just very easy, warm dialogue with someone who really is coming from about as deep as a human being comes.
Now, in the framing of your guests, or when you guys talk about, who to have next, or when you search for new guests, I'm wondering if you are focusing on non-dual spirituality, or whether there's a broader spectrum, or whether you have a criteria, or it's just kind of who is moving you at the moment. I'm curious as to the the editorial kind of framing of the guests.
It feels like, who is primarily who is this person? Are they coming? Have they done significant inner work? Are they coming from that? Are they able to speak well and to issues? And is there an authenticity there? It feels it's more like who is this person? And that, I think, is what's moved me. John, what about you?
Well, anybody, I'm pretty kind of freewheeling, but anybody that meets our brand, deep transformation, which is why we're doing this, to contribute, I think that's very important for both of us. It's fine with me. I don't have any favorite quadrant, really. It's all God, right? But anybody that speaks from a place that will help transform and heal, in whatever quadrant or quadrants is good for me, and that's how I roll with it.
Yeah, and I do think we've both been deeply concerned as things like the tragedy in Gaza have unfolded and the Ukrainian war. John in particular has been very touched by what's going on in Ukraine, and we've had a number of guests there. In fact, I think the most watched episode of all was an incredible dialogue we had with a young woman psychologist who leads a group of psychologists doing trauma work there, and started by a guy, Mark Walsh, in England, who's a trauma trainer, and his wife is Ukrainian, so he went to Ukraine immediately and found, the only psychologists who were available were these young women who were graduating. So he took them and trained them. And the stories, I'm getting teary just thinking about it. Just the stories of working with the trauma there. So that was very touching. And then we had someone, an Israeli psychologist, right after the horrendous massacre in Israel. And we've been looking. I wish we could have someone from Gaza, but we hadn't found the right person there. So we're doing that. But the other thing that really, I think, calls to us both is, the fact that we're in deep trouble as a civilization and a species. And, we're in a race between consciousness and catastrophe. So we are trying to find people who really can speak to the meta crisis, not from one particular angle or perspective, or push one particular political or even ecological perspective, but although we certainly honor those, but who can speak to it from a larger, more integral perspective. And the integral frame is our underlying framework. It's not the program is not specifically integral. We really want to get out beyond the integral ghetto. Much as we both love integral and are deeply indebted to it and to Ken. And we've had Brad Reynolds speaking about Ken's work, which was just an incredible program. But we also want to have dialogues that are framed by that kind of worldview, but don't limit people, that they have to know it.
Yeah, let me say something that's kind of a little off subject, but it's been hitting me for a while. And I was listening to a talk I gave in an interview about military ethics and integral, something like that. And it was in 2023. And I was being very, pro-Israel at the time, because the slaughter had just happened and they wanted to go and take out Hamas. And, I thought that was fine. And to me, Zionism is not a slur word. It's like what happened even before World War II, but they needed a Jewish state. I kind of understand that, and I've been sympathetic for that. But my views have really changed. If they would have stopped, after they took out the leadership, but it just went on and on and on. And I think Netanyahu's a war criminal. I think he's largely doing that so he won't go to jail. It's very hurtful. And there's been so much anti-Israel sentiment, and maybe justly so, but that gives rise to anti-Semitism. I think anti-Semitism is stronger now in the United States than I've ever seen it. And that's tied in with Netanyahu and Gaza and these wars. And anyway, that hurts. And I've had to, change my how I think and feel about that. So,
well, in terms of as you strategize the direction, or at least give some thought to where you hope to take the podcast in the time ahead, are you drawn to international affairs, as you've just described, wars and the problems of the world, or is it more about spirituality, or is it both, or there's something that, maybe you could just speak to how you see the mix of transformation through spirituality and deep practices with these other, more civilizational concerns.
I think it's a both and, as you said, Steve. Certainly I think what is unique, or at least very rare about our podcast, is that all the guests are deep practitioners of one kind or another. So they bring that kind of depth, and that feels crucial. And I think the guiding question that both animates us both, and we hope to keep to, is how can these dialogues be of most benefit? And it's an ongoing koan for us both. And you mentioned, and you said you were very generous in describing it, Steve, and saying, yes, it's, we have 150,000 YouTube subscribers and so forth. And, from one measure, it's doing surprisingly well. It's ranked in the top 1% of the world's podcasts at this stage. But as we look out at the podcast universe, there are over 3 million podcasts. Most of them aren't active or doing much. But what we see is that the podcasts that are really shifting the cultural needle are in the top 0.1%. So, like, that's a Steve Harris, or a Sam Harris, or a Tristan Harris, who does Your Undivided Attention. He's the guy who did the Social Dilemma film and the AI Dilemma film. So these people are doing great work, and when they do something, it tends to shift the cultural needle. I think that's our ideal. Can we, given, and it feels appropriate because we have been, as you mentioned, extremely fortunate in being able to get really good people, and these people deserve a really wide audience. So we feel a kind of a moral obligation to try and do whatever we can to build the community of listeners as much as possible, so these people's ideas can have as much impact as possible.
And I also appreciate that we have anybody that fits into that broad category. So it doesn't have to be non-dual, integral mysticism or something. That's our specialty. That's what we do. No, I think we're special in that people feel comfortable, and we go deep. And at some point, it seems, we've had a couple of duds, but generally it's been really good. The logos kicks in, and it's just the flow happens. And this is okay. This is what we're supposed to be doing. It's very affirming.
Yeah. And often John and I just sit there with our jaw dropping at the end of a conversation with some of these people, and just feel amazed at the gift of these people putting their ideas out, and of so powerfully and effectively as many of them do, and just sit there kind of wondrously stunned at the end, and at the fact this has happened, and the privilege of being able to dialogue with these people. I have to say, I'm just so deeply grateful to John, because this has really been, we've been out now, we're now in our 4th year. This has been one of the great gifts of my life. I mean, think of the opportunity, and you do this here, so you know what we're speaking about. But the privilege of being able to think who would be most fascinating and beneficial to have a really deep conversation with, and then being able to do it. And it's just been a priceless gift. I really just count it as just an extraordinary privilege. Yeah.
Yeah, and working with Roger has been really big for me. Like I said, I was a fan for many years, and what you see is what you get. He's you
two are a dynamic duo for sure.
Yeah, we're definitely same birthdays, but I don't know. I'm kind of the wild-ish, and he's a very disciplined thinker. And he taught in university for 40 years. I taught for a couple of years, but I think it's a good balance. It's a good mix.
Okay, so I want to talk about other things besides the podcast, but before we turn to other topics, you mentioned the other big there 1% podcasts, and obviously there's Joe Rogan and Sam Harris but I'm wondering, in terms of podcasts that have a more wherein spirituality is more central, like yours, if there's other podcasts that you see that you benchmark off of, or look at, or follow, or in other words, who are the adjacent podcasts that you would say are at least relatively similar to your approach?
Yeah.
You guys are unique.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there that calls itself spiritual, but there's not a lot that I want to listen to. And maybe I'm being snobby, but but John, what about you?
Well, I have podcasts that I follow, but nothing like what we do. One I follow is Inside Russia, Konstantin with a K. He's a teenager in the U.S., engineer, very smart man, and he's outside of Russia, letting people know what's going on inside of Russia. And I went to Russia 2014 to do a workshop on integral recovery in Moscow. And so I got, they're not just things on the map. These are actual human beings. And I really connected with these people. So I follow him. And there's one called Combat Vet News, who really gives good information about what's going on in Ukraine. And I appreciate that. I have friends that live in Kyiv that have decided to stay there. They don't have to stay there. And, I call him when, Putin has been sending his forces and bombing everything. And that really takes it home. It makes it very, very real for me. And if there was ever a righteous war, in our times, going back 100 years, Ukraine has to be, it's pretty pure, and if you have to do violence and kill people, it better be for a damn good reason. And they say that if Putin loses this war, there's still a Russia. If Ukraine loses this war, there's no more Ukraine. It's over. So that's very powerful for me. And I try to do everything I can. Sometimes I feel powerless, but
well, good on you for contributing to the right side of history there.
Mm-hmm.
And for obviously moving the ball and getting word out to people so that people don't forget about the suffering in Ukraine and elsewhere in the world. So,
Steve, I do want to add just to your question. In our integral world, of course, I love the Everyone is Right podcast, and there are just multiple people and dialogues on there that I find very valuable and informative. So that's been a gift. Also, like Marion Williamson, she doesn't do so many now, but she's had some very good guests who are likewise, in many cases, spiritual practitioners who speak to particularly political issues. So they're out there.
I would have to mention Jeff Salzman. And I'm not just saying that because he's here, but Jeff really helped me get through the first Trump administration, and I thought he was just such a powerful, compassionate, wise voice. And it really helped. So that was one of the ones that was very important to me.
all right. Anything else you'd like to add regarding your experience with the podcast?
Again, just what a privilege it has been, and to be with these people, and also it's forced us both to do a lot of reading. To at least try and read our guests' latest book or whatever. So we're getting an education in the process, as John implied.
And I did vision questing. And Steve, I know you're very connected to the wilderness also. And I guided a lot of people on vision quests. And one of the central prayers that I learned from Lakota tradition, a teacher friend that I had, is, Great Spirit, have pity on me that my people may live. So you go out there and, God, Great Spirit, Great Mystery, whatever you want to call it. If I don't have the way I'm wired, you wired me, if I don't have purpose and meaning and could contribute to my life, I'm going to die of grief. I'm just not going to make it. I'm not a 7. It's not about having a good time. It's about duty, responsibility, and giving back. And so I always prayed for that in my vision quest and otherwise. And I feel it's a real answer to that cry for meaning and cry for being able to contribute, to give for my people. And keeps expanding. Who are my people?
Yeah, that's beautiful, Joe. Thank you.
Okay, so while we're together here, there's a topic that I mentioned that I really want to bring up and get your thoughts on. And that is, we've all been, sort of participants in and observers of spirituality, especially in the United States and the developed world. And we've lived through many decades of history of, I don't think any of us are connected to mainstream religion of America. I mean, although we have, religious connections, there's not really an agreed upon terminology, but let me just call it alternative spirituality, emerging in the 70s, continue kind of going underground in the 80s, flourishing in the 90s, with people like Marianne Williamson becoming world famous and very influential in the culture, continuing in the 2000s until around 2008. In the recession, there was kind of a not only a recession in the economy, but a recession in spiritual culture. At least it seemed that way, and many of the friends I know who were involved kind of saw that as well. One marker was the success of What is Enlightenment magazine, right, which was an important organ for the integral movement in the 2000s, and how it kind of hung on until 2013 and then stopped publication. And then there was, a whole other issue with the community there. But I really want to talk to you, or at least get your impressions about how alternative spirituality, for lack of a better framing category, how it has evolved into 2026, where you see its remaining vitality, how, if you even think about the difference between, standard New Age spirituality and spirituality that's kind of grown beyond, the magical thinking or intense commercialism of New Age spirituality. I mean, again, I don't want to frame it too narrowly. I just love to hear your thoughts and observations about this 30-year journey that we've all been on in alternative spiritual culture.
Yeah, that does feel like a big question, and I don't think I can do justice to the fullness of it, but it feels important to acknowledge that there are so many streams, and you implied that by pointing to the developmental differences, and that what counts as alternate spirituality runs the entire spectrum of development. So that's one key thing to keep in mind. And I think a lot of perhaps the majority of what counts as spirituality might not be something that we would think of as particularly effective spirituality. I guess for me, what clearly feels like most important in terms of transformative capacity, what Ken Wilber would call the authenticity of a spiritual community or spiritual tradition, is it grounded in an effective practice? And that, to me, feels key. Does it aim, and using Ken's work, and again, if we hear from his book, A Sociable God, does it aim for legitimation or authenticity? Legitimation being that which supports one and nourishes one at one's current stage of development, versus authenticity which is a measure of how much a tradition has the capacity to transform and move people. At the time he wrote the book, it would have been to later stages, but I think he would now say to deeper states and later stages. So that for me feels a really another crucial marker or divide. To what extent is a spiritual movement and community grounded in an authentic set of transformative practices? And to what extent does the community serve that as what the Buddhists would call a sangha, a spiritual community of like-minded people who are committed to a set of spiritual ideals? You mentioned the magazine What is Enlightenment, and okay, partial aside here. I think enlightenment is a lousy category. It's unidimensional. It only speaks about one kind of transformation. It's all or none, and so it really doesn't do anywhere near justice to the varieties of transformation that are available, and that sages and scholars like Adi Dar, Hamid Ali, scholars Ken Wilber and others have map out as the variety of awakening possibilities and maturing possibilities. And to my mind, spiritual maturity is a much more functional category. And so to my mind, one of the key questions is, to what extent does a spiritual tradition serve and foster spiritual maturity? And part of spiritual maturity culminates in service. A service both as a practice, that which is karma yoga being the yoga which work and action in the world, which uses one's work as the focus and vehicle for one's awakening. And so service can be a means for awakening, but it is also a culmination of awakening. So those are some of the criteria that I think of as really crucial as we think about the wide variety of what so-called contemporary spiritualities.
Yeah, and for me, in my case, just integral practice has been really important for me. I wrote about in my book, the core of integral recovery is integral practice, the body, mind, spirit, trauma, shadow, all this stuff. And because I've been teaching and preaching it, they say, you point the finger at somebody, there's three coming back at you. So I felt very accountable to do it myself, because I want to walk my talk. And, I've criticized others for being a hypocrite, so I probably am too, but I don't want to be, and I try. And there's something about these practices as I've got into it, that the important thing is faithfulness to the practice, not successful states or, all of this stuff. It's just sticking with it. And it's become a very, personal thing for me. And I sometimes, I get an idea that, wow, like a few weeks back, I got this idea for 12 steps for the recovery of the American soul, based on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous that was published in 1939. And I started working on it, and it's absolutely amazing. And that was just an inspiration that came. So in my silent time or my inner time, I'm just saying, God, is there anything I'm supposed to be doing, learning, forgiving? Please let me know and speak clearly, because I'm pretty thick-skulled. And if you want me to do it, just be really clear about it. And otherwise, I'll shut up now, God, and thank you. So that's kind of how it rolls.
Okay, well, I mean, at the top of the hour here, in a couple of minutes, I want to open it up to our audience and let them ask you any question or take it down any path they want, because you guys have, your fonts of wisdom, right? There's so many questions we could ask. But in terms of my own interest, I just want to talk a little bit more about the culture of spirituality and its evolution. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I've tried to do is sort of step outside of history and say, how will people view our time, especially when it comes to spirituality and culture, 200 years from now? And so, for example, if we look back, 400 years ago, we had the Protestant Reformation, which was a change in religious culture. And of course, it had all kinds of turmoil and war that went with it. But one of the things, maybe not to the same historical magnitude, but we always discount, the historical significance of our own time. When I see the rise of alternative spirituality, again, starting in the 70s and maturing over the decades and still being vibrant in many ways, but not perhaps where it was between 1995 and 2005. One of the things I want to ask you about, let me frame it this way. One of the ways of understanding what spirituality is, I like to think about the three-way circle, or like it's almost like a hermeneutic circle. So there's spiritual practice, spiritual teaching, and spiritual experience. And those, inform each other, and there's a circular.
And Steve, I'd throw in service in that circle. I'd add another one.
Sure, and I would say experience and practice. I mean, it's like service is a kind of spiritual practice, and I like to frame it in terms of goodness, truth, and beauty as what you're giving, and also at least part of the spectrum of spiritual experience. But the question that I have is regarding spiritual teaching specifically. And since you've had so many accomplished non-dual teachers on your podcast and have a great affinity for non-dual teachings yourselves, I want to run by you the idea, or just tell me what you think, good, positive or negative, regarding the idea that over the last 30 years, we're witnessing a kind of a merger between non-dual Hinduism and non-dual Buddhism, in the sense that both of those have contributed strongly to what is now in the marketplace of ideas as non-duality, right? So, as far as I understand it, Hamid Ali is a non-dual teacher, and I know that he has certainly, studied and practiced in different lineages and has an eclectic, multiple sources that have fed into his own non-dual teachings. But not just Ali, but if we think about Eckhart Tolle or Adyashanti or Rupert Spira, or many of the prominent teachers who've been successful at gathering large audiences, who are non-dual teachers, but not strictly in the lineage of either Buddhism or Hinduism. I'd love to know whether you think that the rise of non-duality will be compared in the future like the Protestant Reformation, like a historically significant development that'll impact human history, from a spiritual perspective.
Well, I think that the psychedelic revolution of the 60s and 70s, and I guess it's still going on, made these non-dual states much more available. I used to read, Book of Revelations, like, what? It's like, okay, I've had something like that. And when you listen, once you've had those experiences, you've opened up in that way, you start taking the teaching more seriously, because it's a lived experience. You've known that. And so now with of course, with the internet, we have, and much less AI, we have access to everything. It's just all there. All the great teachers are ever there.
Wisdom of the ages for the first time. Yeah.
Just amazing. And I hope we don't screw it up. I hope we do use it for good. But maybe that's the great blending of all these great traditions, and kind of ending up in the same place, or starting at the same place. And it's important that it's a transformative practice. In other words, it makes you a better person. Better able to handle the tragedies of life, better able to handle the injustices of rich and poor, and all these different things in a way that's more compassionate and understanding. And contributes to the good, and the good, the true, and the beautiful. So I think that, given the kick in the pants that we got from psychedelics, which is big, in long times in the wilderness was big for me. Extended trips into the wilderness was a big opening for me. But now that we have so many, of course, there's been problems too. There's been cults. I mean, there's something in the human psyche that just wants to do cults, apparently, and they keep coming up. And I think our integral movement has had some trouble along those lines. And so you have the good and the bad, but generally it gives us a shared experience. More people have had this experience in these times probably than in any other time in human history, and probably never needed as much as now. So I don't know if that's answering any questions, Steve, that you were saying, but that's kind of how it.
Well, there's no answers that I'm specifically looking for. I just want you to talk about non-duality and its impact on culture.
Yeah. Yeah, I've experienced it. But, there's a saying that said, God help me to live in the valley what I experienced on the mountain. So I don't live in this constant non-dual state, but I've tasted it. Well, I can talk to Hamid and read his stuff, and well, yeah, I kind of know that stuff, yeah, that tastes right, and so yeah, well, there it is,
Thanks.
and it's big. And if you're non-dual is not just non-dual; it's non-dual and compassion and love. If you just have this psychotic thing where I'm everything, off my ego, yikes, I don't know how helpful that is. But if it's a non-dual that comes with a message of love and active compassion in the world to all creatures, okay, and the earth, the water, the air, that's getting there, and we can act from that place. And when we touch into that, then we try to live our lives informed by that space. And, by the grace of God, maybe we'll have some more. But, I've been very blessed in having powerful experiences of the non-dual. And God is everything. And God is love. That's like, okay, wow. How do you live that, right? So.
Excellent. Thank you.
Good question. Yeah, a couple of thoughts. One is, non-dual kind of has become the spiritual flavor of the of the year or the decade, and I think it's important to note, as far as I can see, one reason it became so popular because it was touted as the highest form of of awakening, and everyone wanted it, and so everyone began calling themselves non-dual, and it was so there's a little bit of superficiality and egocentricity underlying the popularity of non-dual. And Hamid is very clear that there are so many realizations, and one of the things he wanted to do was just get people to realize that there's this whole panoply of possibilities, one non-dual being one of them. And one of the things that's happening is that we're beginning to realize that non-dual is a very imprecise term. It was originally Vedantic, and it referred to the non-duality of Brahman and the manifest realm. And then it got watered down as in the West to kind of a sense of oneness with either the world, a kind of nature mysticism a la Ken, or with a deity, or with quotes the deity, etc. But the person doing really intriguing and absolutely groundbreaking work on this is Sean Hargens, and Sean has been giving a series of internet classes. If he does another, I highly recommend it to everyone, on the varieties of non-duality. And Sean has found non-dual experiences in multiple traditions and begun to map out the different kinds of non-dual experiences, the way they're described. So we have a long way to go in our understanding of this. And I really liked what you said, John, that, yeah, it's nice to have some experiences, but I'm surprised you didn't quote the Bible. This will be the first time ever that I've quoted the Bible to John. By their fruits ye shall know them. So was basically what you were saying, John. John knows the Bible back to front and is able to quote chapter and verse. So I usually go, oh, really? So this is the first. I want us to note this, me quoting something to John. So, but
it's true. It's true everywhere and for everyone, like at that level of, the by their fruits teaching, because that's something I live by. Try to hold myself to.
Yeah, it's a beautiful one. So yeah, and there's a lot more we could say, but I think I'll move on.
Okay. Well, thanks for that. I guess at this point I want to open it up, hand it back to Rigel, and I'm sure there are some comments and questions and ways that folks in our knowledgeable audience want to engage you. So take it away, Rigel.
All right.
I want to say one last thing about spirituality is that I think real spirituality the fruits thereof would also be humility, not, expanded, grandiose sense of I'm above the rest of you guys, but a deep, deep humility before it all. So.
Sure, I would underline that, not only by the fruits of service, but also by the virtue of living, and humility is certainly a strong one.
Great. Great chat, you guys. Looks like we already have a few people with their hands raised. If you do have a question or a comment, challenge, and support, raise your hand using the react button, and that way I can kind of keep track of everyone. So we'll start with Brad and then Tom.
All right. Hi, John. Hi, Roger. Steve. Good to see you all. And I see Tom's right behind me. So I don't want to ask a philosophical question. It was a great talk. I really appreciated it. John got to know you a little bit better, which is always fantastic. But what I want to ask about, since I saw you both there, is the Icon conference that we just had. Because I watched it on video and I found it to be just absolutely fantastic, I thought. And Steve was there. Everybody gave a great talk. And what I really appreciated was the community that I felt was going on, the we space. And it was really wonderful. So I'd just like to hear what you guys felt being there in person. I saw you on the camera, and it was really great to see you both there. So tell me what you thought about the Icon conference.
Well, ditto to everything you said, Brad. To me, it just felt wonderful. Deep bow to Tom for putting it on and all the other people who supported you. It's an enormous logistical effort to create something like that, but to bring a community like that together, it's just such a gift. And anyone who's interested in Ken and studies his work ticks a lot of interesting boxes. They're smart, they're psychologically minded, they usually have a spiritual practice, and they're usually doing something really creative in the world. So those are really fun people to hang out with. And it was virtually impossible to have a boring conversation.
No, it was definitely a we space. And I've been in the integral world since Integral Naked was a little baby. That's like, I read Ken in grad school also, Up from Eden and a couple of others books. But that's when it really started rolling for me and had all these great teachers like Jeff and Ken and all this. It was just like, man, I was just ready for it. It was right there. So when I go, I meet old friends. Robert, you were there, and that was really blessed, very good. And people that I've known and worked for years. And then there's other people that they're new, they're coming to me that either know it through the recovery thing or iAwake or the podcast, but just these very powerful connections. And like I said, Roger and I met at one of these things. So these get-togethers are really, really important if you can possibly do it. And to me, it was, it's a hassle getting there and all that stuff. It was very, very worth the price on all the levels to be there and to connect with my people. Everybody's my people, but these guys are really my people. I mean, there's just a shared understanding and a shared struggle and joy and pain that we share as being a part of, I call it the integral Cosa Nostra. And there it is. And thank you, Tom. Well done.
Great. All right, Tom, and then Georgie.
So congratulations, John and Roger, on the podcast. And Brad, thank you very much for the endorsement. I wanted to get your perspective, though, because we're getting incredible feedback about the state experience of the conference. And in your view, over time, does this represent a maturing of this community in terms of how they show up and all the individual growth? Are we seeing the culmination? Are we on a threshold to something new in our community, in your opinion?
I don't know about the state experience, but I was struck at this conference by the shift towards practical application in people's work and lives. And it wasn't so much about concept building or theory building, which I'm certainly a fan of and enjoy, but I was really struck that you found people who were really finding ways to apply integral in new ways and in new fields that were innovative, creative, exciting. So that's always a lot of fun to see. That feels like a certain kind of maturation. And I guess the question is, how can a conference like that support all of us in our application of an integral framework and our maturation in light of it?
Yeah, it was. It's very powerful for me. There's a field that's created when all these people get together, and have we matured? I sure hope so. The integral thing when I first got a part of it was a lot of young people, and there were amazing. I was a young person back then, actually, and a lot younger, and yeah, I do feel there's a maturation. I don't know if we've hit it, whatever that is, but I definitely sense it in people, and anyway, it's just always very transformative experiences for me, and things will happen. It's almost miraculous. The connections that are made, the light flashes, the lightning that goes off, and all the stuff that happens, and the deep warmth, and sometimes not liking some stuff. There was one guy that got out there and just pissed me off, and I'm not going to say who. It wasn't you, Robert. And I just like, God, what an arrogant asshole, So, and it wasn't, yeah. So, and Roger got up and did a comedy routine, Confessions of a Failed Integralist, and he killed it. A standing ovation, so bloody funny, and yeah. So I'm just rambling about it, but there it is.
That's a sign of maturity. All right, Georgie, and then Charles.
I'd like to know where to watch that. Maybe someone could put that in the chat. So, you talked about the psychedelic revolution and that it made non-dual states available as a lived-in experience. It seems like that's a cultural expression. Maybe it was only with some, but then looking at non-duality as you describe it, seems like a cultural expression. So my question is, what could the next cultural expression be? So you're talking more in specifics, and I'm trying to get away from the theory and into the practice of what might the next cultural expression be.
Yeah, well, I'm not quite sure what you're meaning by expression. I would frame the advent of psychedelics slightly differently, in that it transformed the culture in many ways, and we're still in many ways we're still coming to terms with the impact of these curious chemicals. But one of the things it clearly did was it began the transformation of Western society from what's called a monophasic culture to a polyphasic culture. Monophasic cultures take the usual waking state as the norm and center on that. Polyphasic cultures draw from a variety of states: dreaming, reverie, drumming, meditation, contemplative practices, fasting, etc., and meld their worldview out of those. So when the Western world was really was certainly the largest and one of few monophasic cultures, and clearly psychedelics began that shift, which we are still part of, and that opened the door, shall we say, for the influx first of Eastern contemplative practices, as people who'd had psychedelic experiences looked for ways of having them without the psychedelics, and looked to the Western traditions and didn't find much there, found mainly mainstream conventional mythic, and looked to the East where they found contemplative practices, worked in those, then came back and then realized, hidden behind the mainstream religious institutions and its myths and rituals are in fact a much less well-known body of contemplative practices and profound mystics. So it opened the culture in that way, which is a way which is still proceeding. What would be next? It's very interesting. If you look at it's interesting that the psychedelic revolution came about because of technological innovations, in this case, pharmaceuticals, plus the discovery of natural ones, of course. But if you look at the other technological innovations which have systematically induced altered states, you have resuscitation technology, which produced thousands and thousands and thousands of people who've had near-death experiences, and biofeedback or neurofeedback machines, and your space travel with its so-called overview effect. Now, who could have possibly predicted any of those? So what the next technology will be that induces a variety of altered states, I haven't a clue. But it does feel like we now have an opening in which it's really valuable to legitimate the nature and transformative impact of contemplative practices, to find ways of interpreting them and legitimating them in contemporary psychological language, and through the formidable body of research on them that's going on now, and bring these more and more widely into the mainstream. Now, as they do, they will get watered down, and we already have McDonald mindfulness, as some people call it. But that even McDonald mindfulness can be very transformative. So anything, I'm fine with whatever gets people in the door and has at least the potential for having beneficial transformative effects and outcomes.
Yeah, I would say I really don't know. I think AI is big. Like I said, how are we going to use it? Are we going to use it in honorable, good ways to do good in the world, to eliminate poverty, cure cancer, help us to stop killing each other? I hope so. But, anything that human beings get their hands on, it's going to be used for ill, and it's going to be used for good. But I think that's at the conference, there was a lot of talk about AI, because it's this ridiculously transformative, powerful technologies that's emerged. But when I'm thinking about the future, I think kind of chaos theory, and how higher order comes out of chaos in some mysterious way that's programmed by randomness. I don't know. I'm just joking about that. I don't think it's random. But what that higher order is totally unpredictable. It's just some new thing, and it seems to be, going faster. So let's hope and see, and hope that, each of us in our own individual small way can move in that direction and be of service in that direction, and somehow. And I think even our practice, and I pray and I meditate also. It's kind of meditation or something like that. It's just come together. But I do pray for you guys. I do pray for Ukraine. I pray for the Russian soldiers that are being killed, and all this stuff. And I do it because that's what I do, whether it's any effective or not. But my soul seems to call me to do that. So, but I have no idea, but I'm really interested in seeing, and I hope it will be, in some ways, we're hitting bottom. As we talk about in alcoholics and addiction, you have to hit a bottom before you can begin the journey of transformation. And I hope that bottom's not too horrible. And we had a saying in recovery is that you hit your bottom when you stop digging, So if we can stop digging a bit, I think that would be helpful. And I'm inspired by what's going on in Hungary, how they got rid of Orban after 16 years of his oppressive dictatorship. And Vince Gante was there at the conference, and he showed some videos of what it was like building up to the election. And when it happened, these people, there were tears in my eyes. It was so good just to see something so inspiring and good, we see so much bad stuff, but it really gave me hope that we can move toward a higher order of democracy, and make that available to everyone. Democracy and a dignified life in all four quadrants. We have to figure out how to do that. And there's not just one way to do it. So anyway, enough.
Thank you. I just want to say that what I got from that was not just looking at what's breaking down, but what's breaking through. So I like your hopeful answer. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, we'll get to Charles in a sec, but what was just bubbling up while you're talking about that is, it's coming to mind is like out of the 70s, the psychedelic, this movement into like hyper out of body experience of the internet. It's almost like I wonder if the tack is going to be a hyper in body sort of correction, because I mean that we've maxed on out of bodiness. So I don't know.
Yeah, in the body experiences are much rarer.
Yeah. All right, Charles, and then Mary.
Great. Thank you. And this is mostly for Roger, though I'm happy to hear whatever comes forward. Roger, you and I've met a few times over the last 20 or so years, but I've always learned a lot. And 20-ish years ago, you hooked me on the concept of karma yoga. And I do management consulting. I work all over the world with you chief executives and such. And what I do with them when it is at its potential is karma yoga. And one, thank you for giving me that placeholder. But I'm also curious, I come out of Japanese traditions where there's Zen or the various martial arts, and I don't know of good sources in the historical writings of Japan or of modern writings that have interpreted those historical sources in ways that would help me find what cultural flavor there might be in a Japanese karma yoga. And I'm curious if you have sources there, if you have explored those avenues. I'd love to hear what's there for you and for anyone else as well.
Yeah, well, I'm so delighted to know you're out there doing this, Charles. That's beautiful that you're having an impact and you're doing it as practice and coming from a place of service and awakening. It's just inspiring to hear people doing that. I don't think I can give you any specific sources. What I find is that all the great traditions imply a kind of karma yoga, and karma yoga is the Hindu one of the four central yogas of Hinduism, in which one uses one's work and service in the world as the focus and means of for one's awakening. But I think it seems to be implicit else in all the great traditions as far as I can see, but nowhere is it nearly as clearly articulated as a specific practice. So all the great traditions, as far as I can see, culminate in the recognition that there's ego transcendence, but beyond ego transcendence or there's self-transcendence but beyond self-transcendence is selfless service. But I don't know of another tradition that so clearly articulates the specifics of making that a practice. And even karma yoga doesn't have a lot. It has this beautiful vision of the practice, but doesn't have a lot of details on how to do it. Which is a little surprising and disappointing. And that was what actually nudged me to write an article on that some years ago, which I think is available online in a couple of formats, about what are the specific steps one can take. So the specific answer to your question, Charles, is no, I can't give you a reference, but I think if, as I'm sure you have looked, you've pretty much probably found it.
Yes.
In various forms.
Yes. Great. Thank you. I guess it's up to us.
Yeah. And a non-Japanese source, I'd say read Matthew chapter 25. That's pretty much Christian yoga right there.
Awesome.
Good.
Thank you.
All right, Mary.
Hey, Roger, I have an old story for you and a
Ah,
lot of gratitude. So while this talk was going on, I stood up and I could hear everything, but I was desperately searching for my Beyond Ego original book. I was a undergrad at UC Irvine in the early 80s, and I literally randomly selected transpersonal psychology with Dr. Roger Walsh, a 2-semester course, as I recall. You had structured it because I have this vivid memory of sitting in the auditorium and you said, "This isn't for everyone." And it's 2 semesters, so I really want a commitment. So I'm going to give you some homework. You come back in 2 weeks, let me know if you're in, because I want you to go 2 semesters, not to me, the whole class was hearing this. I took your cues with the reading and the original assignments, and it literally blew my 19-year-old mind. I was completely hooked. I couldn't get enough. I looked at people in the audience who didn't understand and didn't get it. There were some of us who really got it and some of us who didn't get it at all. So I want to thank you deeply from the bottom of my heart for kicking that lever inside of me, which the beauty of me searching for my original Beyond Ego and Paths Beyond Ego books, which are somewhere in my very large bookshelf, had me looking at all the titles of all my books on my bookshelf. And they absolutely reflect the moment that I stumbled into the waterfall of transpersonal psychology and spiritual practice and all these authors. So it was a sweet, sweet memory for me. When I finally went to grad school as a psychology grad from UCI, I remember I lived in Fresno, went to Cal State Fresno to the department chair and wanted to go to grad school. And he said, "Well, what kind of topic do you like?" And I said, "Well, the topic I really loved was transpersonal psychology as an undergrad." And he was a neuropsych guy and a statistician, and he laughed me out of his office. "That's not serious, Nobody does that." So I didn't, social psychology was my first master's degree. But long story short, as I am now, well into my developmental adulthood and a life of seeking, and I see the world opening up, my question for both you and John, and I love your podcast, but your 1% comment caused me to go to look at the top 50 and the top 100, and it's a mixed bag. So my question to you both, as the world seems to have its back against the wall, a burning wall, and people are variously falling apart or cracking wide open, how do we get people to connect with the voices of this deep humanity that you both represent and that your conversations most definitely represent? Because it's up to all of us who care or who give a damn to try and open up space for promoting these voices, especially now. So that's my question on the table. And thank you both so much. And thank you, Roger, for, pushing me off the cliff.
well, and thank you so much for telling that story. You never know the impact you have. And so a story like that, you've just made my day. So thank you very much. And Mary, maybe you'll send me an email so we can continue to be in touch down the line. And thank you for your work getting out there and taking this out and continuing it. And I think the question you're raising, how do we touch and support and heal and help and awaken as many people as we can? How is effectively the question. I think that's a call for all of us. How do we become optimal instruments of service? And it's really important to know what kind of question that is, because there are two major kinds: knowledge questions and wisdom questions. Knowledge questions have a one-time answer. They're simple. Is it raining outside? Look out the window. End of question. But wisdom questions are more like koans. Every time you ask a wisdom question, such as, how can I become an optimal instrument of service? Every time you ask it, has potential for taking you deeper into the question, deeper into yourself, and deeper into life. And there's no final answer. Well, hopefully all of us will be asking that question for the rest of our life. And hopefully we'll be looking for ways to hone ourselves so as to live most fully and contribute most effectively. And I really have come to appreciate Joseph Campbell's statement of follow your bliss, and to see, as John was implying, that service and other virtues are not, as our culture thinks, sacrifices. They're enlightened self-interest. To live lovingly and kindly and generously, and to try to help as much as possible. It's like that's the most fulfilling thing as a human being can do. And so it's just a wonderfully rewarding activity. And I thank you for really raising the great question for our lives. How can we be most effective in touching and helping people? Yeah. Thank you so much.
Excuse me, Roger. I'd like to add on to that, the St. Francis prayer, Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. We got to find out what your gifts are. We're all not Steve McIntoshes, and we're all not Roger Walsh's, and we're all not Jeff Salzen. We are, we are what we are. But when you recognize that gift, and the angel comes down with a flaming sword and say, go do this, you should do it. And really give that gift to the world, and in the best, most integral, truthful, honest, honorable way that you can, and trust God for the results. Just do what you're supposed to do, and that's all we can do. And and I wanted to say, when I got pissed off at that guy at the conference, I didn't take that home, by the way. It worked out, and I was, because I loved everything else, and I just, this guy's really bugging me. But I was able to connect with him later, and in that field of the conference, you could seem to make spiritual progress really easily because you have these amazing people all there. And so I didn't walk away with that.
Well, those are some beautiful words to end on. Thank you so much, John and Roger. This was fantastic. Our next talk is going to be with Steve McIntosh next month, July 8th. So I hope you all will come back for that. Steve, is there anything else you want to say about that, or final word?
No, I mean, next time I'm not going to give a talk. I'm just going to take questions, but we're also going to have breakout groups. So there'll be a greater opportunity for people to interact with each other. And so we're going to have a kind of a summer workshop style next time, as opposed to a more formal presentation like we've had the past few months. And I can just say I'm so grateful to Roger and John, and to everybody here, and to you, Rigel, and thanks again for making this a beautiful experience.
And add just one thing that came out before the show started rolling is I said Roger and I are going to get together and celebrate our birthdays, July 3rd, and happens that Steve's is the same day.
Yeah, we all have the same birthday.
That's amazing.
What kind of synchronicity is that?
Great. Beautiful.
All right.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Happy birthday, all.
Happy birthday. All right.